I used to believe that if you gave someone your whole heart, they'd protect it. That's what I thought marriage was. That's what I thought she was. Clara had this way of speaking that made you feel small for asking questions. A sharp smile, a tilt of her head, and suddenly you were the unreasonable one. So when she told me she was going to a tech conference in Santa Fe, I just blinked, swallowed my unease, and forced a nod. "Bo, don't start," she said before I even opened my mouth. "It's just work." I hated how she said that, like I was a clingy leash wrapped around her ankle. But I'd seen the late-night texts, the way she angled her phone away when I entered the room, the sudden interest in makeup she hadn't worn in years. And the gym? Clara used to mock people who ran on treadmills like hamsters. Now she was one of them. Still, I said nothing, just smiled like a fool and helped her pack. Folded her black silk blouse with trembling fingers, knowing deep down she hadn't worn it for me in years. The night she left, I stood by the window for hours. The house was too quiet. Even our golden retriever, Maddie, seemed confused. Something inside me cracked when I checked our shared location on my phone. She'd told me she'd be at a Marriott, but her GPS pinged at some rental cabin on the outskirts of the city. A place with no conference rooms, but definitely a king-sized bed. I didn't sleep that night, and by morning, I had made a decision. One that would change everything. She wanted to leave like a ghost in the night? Fine. I would become one too. I didn't even pack properly. Just shoved a couple of shirts into my old duffel bag, grabbed Maddie's photo from the nightstand, and left the house like it was on fire. As I drove, the New Mexico landscape blurred past. Desert stretches, bleeding sunsets, and dry winds that howled like they knew what I was about to find. I had no plan, no backup, just a growing knot in my stomach and a heart pounding louder than my old truck's engine. Clara had been my everything. My first love, my last hope, my reason for breathing on the worst days. I'd stayed when she lost her job. I'd held her when her mother died. I paid off her student loans without a second thought. And somehow, I became the burden. The dull routine she needed a break from. I kept trying to talk myself out of it. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe she needed time alone. But then, why lie about the hotel? Why change her password last week? Why start calling me Bo instead of baby? Like we were distant cousins instead of husband and wife. I reached Santa Fe just after midnight. Her location was still on. The cabin was tucked into a quiet stretch of woods, way too romantic for a business trip. I parked far enough not to be seen. My hands trembled as I stepped out. I could hear my pulse in my ears, louder than the wind, louder than the crickets. There was a soft golden glow leaking out from behind the curtains of the cabin. Music drifted out, jazz. Clara hated jazz. Then I saw it. His shadow, tall, moving behind the window. And hers. 2 wine glasses on the table. Laughter. Laughter. Like a knife through my chest. I stood there, frozen. Some pathetic statue of heartbreak. Not angry. Not yet. Just shattered. My heart had known this moment was coming. But no preparation could have dulled the sting of watching her dance in someone else's arms. The same arms she once told me were her home. I could have stormed in. Could have kicked the door off its hinges. But something in me said, don't give her that satisfaction. So I turned around, got in my truck, and drove back into town. Straight to a 24-hour print shop. With shaking hands, I printed the divorce papers I had already drafted months ago. Out of paranoia, maybe. Or instinct. I added one thing before hitting print. A note at the bottom. You're free now. So am I. The next morning, I returned to the cabin. Knocked once. When Clara opened the door, her makeup smeared and hair tangled from the night. I didn't even look at her lover. I just handed her the envelope. She blinked. Bo. What? But I was already walking back to the truck. I didn't need answers anymore. I needed to disappear. I didn't go home. That place wasn't home anymore. It was a crime scene. The outlines of broken trust were everywhere. On the bedsheets. In the silence that used to be comfortable, now deafening. I drove west until the road stopped talking to Maine. No music. No GPS. Just me, Maddie's photo clipped to the dashboard, and the hum of tires against the earth. I landed in a town that didn't even have a Starbucks. That was part of the appeal. No familiar faces. No chance of Clara finding me. Not that she tried. At least, not at first. For months, I worked the night shift at a bait shop owned by a guy named Lowell who smelled like wet cardboard and kindness. He never asked why I looked like someone had peeled my soul off with a butter knife. He just handed me the keys and said, don't steal the lures. They're expensive. During the day, I lived in a tiny trailer behind the shop, slept beside a space heater that wheezed like it had bronchitis, and stared at the ceiling, thinking of all the things I should have said. But grief is weird. It doesn't hit like a truck. It drips, slow and steady, like a leaking faucet in a room you're chained to. You try to ignore it. You turn up the TV. But eventually, it floods the place. I missed her. God, I hate admitting that. But I missed her laugh, before it became fake. I missed the way she used to trace circles on my arm when we watched movies. I even missed her stubbornness, the way she could argue a hole into the wall if it meant she got the last word. I started talking to Maddie's photo. Told her everything. That dad was a fool. That Clara didn't just cheat on him. She hollowed him out and wore him like a mask until there was nothing left but skin and confusion. That no matter how strong I tried to act, some nights I still hoped she'd call and say it was all a mistake. But the calls never came. Except one. 6 months into my disappearance, I finally turned my phone back on at a diner near the Arizona border. It took 30 minutes to boot. The battery was bloated like it had been holding in secrets too long. And then came the notifications. 17 missed calls from Clara. Dozens of texts. A few voicemails I couldn't bring myself to hear. One message, sent just a week before. Bo, you have no right to disappear like this. We need to talk. Please. I didn't expect it to go like that. Call me. Please. I deleted everything. She had said, we need to talk, like I was a stubborn child, not a man she betrayed. And what did she mean? Didn't expect it to go like that? Like her affair had a script, and I ruined the scene? I looked at Maddie's picture. She was smiling, tongue out, ears perked. So innocent. So unlike the people who tear hearts apart and call it growing up. That's when I knew I couldn't stay angry forever, but I also couldn't forgive. So I made a decision. If Clara ever wanted closure, she'd never get it. I changed my name, dyed my hair, started over in a town so small it didn't even have a welcome sign. And for 5 years, I became a ghost. Until last Tuesday, when I got the letter from her, and everything I'd buried clawed its way back up. It was raining that morning, the kind of thin, sad rain that doesn't soak your clothes, just your mood. I'd just opened the bait shop and was restocking earthworms when I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. No one visited at that hour. Fishermen came at dawn or didn't come at all. A faded blue sedan pulled up, and a woman stepped out, mid-50s, stiff shoulders, the kind of expression that said she hated being the messenger. She didn't say a word, just handed me a plain white envelope. For Beauregard Langley, she said. No one here knew me by that name. She turned and drove off before I could ask anything. Like her only job was delivery. Like she didn't want to stay and watch what happened next. I took the envelope inside, sat on the stool behind the register, and stared at my name, my real name, for the first time in years. I felt like I was holding a live wire. I must have turned it over a dozen times before finally tearing the seal. Inside was a single page. No return address. Just handwriting I'd recognize in my sleep. Clara's. Slanted, confident, a little too sharp. Bo, if you're reading this, it means the investigator I hired finally earned his ridiculous fee. I'm not writing to ask you back. I know that ship sank with no survivors. I'm writing because you deserve to know something. I'm not well. I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer last winter. The doctors aren't optimistic. I wouldn't be either if I were them. I've done a lot of awful things, both things I told myself were okay because I was tired, because I was trapped, because I was finding myself. But they weren't okay. Not with you. Not with what we had. I don't expect forgiveness. But I'd like you to come see me. Not because I deserve it. Just because I'm scared. I'm staying at my sister's place in Ruidoso. Room 5. Please. Clara. I didn't move for a long time. The rain ticked on the tin roof like a clock running out. My stomach twisted, not with sadness, but with rage that somehow managed to be polite. Clara had always been like that. Cruelty served on a linen napkin. Now she wanted me to come comfort her? Me? The man she shredded, discarded, and forgot? But then the guilt came knocking too. Uninvited, but loud. Because a part of me, some weak, fractured part, still cared. And I hated that part of myself. I closed the shop early and went home. Poured myself a drink I hadn't touched in years. Sat in my tiny trailer and stared at the wall until it blurred. Maddie's photo sat on the shelf above me, dusty now. She'd passed last year. Peacefully, in her sleep. The last piece of the life I had with Clara gone. Now all that remained was this letter and a ticking clock. Go, and risk reopening wounds I'd stitched shut with blood? Or stay, and live with the question burning in my ribs like acid? By morning, I'd made my choice. Not for her. For me. Because if the past was reaching for me again, I needed to face it. even if it meant watching the woman who ruined me fade away. It was surreal, driving back toward a world I'd once burned to ashes. Ruidoso. That town had once been a weekend getaway for Clara and me. Before the betrayal, before the silence, we'd stroll its sleepy sidewalks hand in hand, pretending we were a simpler couple than we really were, pretending we weren't already falling apart beneath the surface. Now, I was coming back alone, older, harder, and if I was honest, scared. Not of Clara, not even of what she might say. I was scared of what I might still feel. The road snaked through the mountains like a memory you can't quite forget. Familiar curves, broken pavement, the ghost of laughter echoing from forest trails we once hiked. I hated that my heart remembered it all, even after 5 years of trying to forget. The sun was setting by the time I reached her sister's place. It wasn't a house. It was an old roadside motel, converted into something halfway livable. Weathered siding, peeling paint, room numbers faded by time and disuse. Clara was in room 5, like she'd said. My boots crunched across gravel as I approached. I paused outside the door. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times. The cruel things I would say, the stoic silence I'd hold. Maybe I'd just hand her another letter, like she once did to me, and vanish again. But when I knocked, all those plans collapsed. Because the woman who opened the door wasn't Clara. At least, not the Clara I knew. Her hair was thinner, falling in dull strings past hollow cheeks. Her once perfect posture was curled in on itself like her body had folded beneath the weight of its own regrets. And her eyes, God, her eyes, had no fire left. Only ashes. She blinked once, like she thought I was a dream. "Beau," she rasped. Her voice, so small, so unrecognizable. I should have felt triumph. Righteousness. The satisfaction of revenge long overdue. Instead, I felt nothing. Just tired. "I got your letter," I said, arms crossed, tone cold. "Took your investigator long enough." She tried to smile. It looked like it hurt. "Come in," she asked. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The room was plain. A single bed, a cracked mirror, a vase of wilting carnations, an oxygen tank in the corner. Time had not been kind. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. She offered me tea. I declined. She coughed a lot. Her fingers shook when she reached for her water glass. And still, she looked at me like I was the one she'd wronged yesterday. "I know you hate me," she said softly. "I don't," I replied. And weirdly, it was true. I didn't hate her. I just didn't recognize her. "What do you want, Clara?" I finally asked. Closure? Forgiveness? A deathbed confession? She laughed, a dry, bitter thing that ended in a wheeze. "I just wanted to see your face again before I leave this world. One last time, so I could remember something real." I said nothing, just stared at the woman who had once been my whole life. "You were the only good thing I ever had, Beau," she whispered. "And I destroyed you." Yes, she had. And I let her. That was the part that still hurt. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. "There's something for you. Something I never had the guts to give you back then." I took it, unread. She didn't ask me to stay the night. I didn't offer. As I stepped back outside, she called after me. "I'm glad you came. Even if it's just to say goodbye." I didn't look back, because I didn't know if I was strong enough to see her face and still keep walking. I drove off into the night, the envelope on the passenger seat, unopened. But I knew this story wasn't over yet. Not until I saw what she had left inside that letter. I didn't open it right away. The envelope Clara gave me sat there, silently judging me from the passenger seat as I drove aimlessly through the winding back roads of Lincoln County. It was a simple white thing. No markings, no weight, but heavy like a stone on my chest. I pulled over at an old overlook, the same one we'd parked at years ago when we were still newlyweds. Back then, Clara had wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "Let's never let life get boring." She kept her promise, just not the way I hoped. I sat on the hood of my truck, the mountains turning deep purple as twilight swallowed the horizon. I stared at that envelope like it held a piece of my soul I didn't know was missing. Eventually, I opened it. Inside was a photograph. A little girl, maybe 4, maybe 5, sitting on a swing in a backyard I didn't recognize. She had wide green eyes, a crooked grin, wild, curly hair like mine when I was that age. She wore a faded pink hoodie with a unicorn patch on it. And on the back, in Clara's shaky handwriting, 5 words. "Her name is June. Yours too." I dropped the photo, stared at it like it had burned me. Mine? What did she mean, mine? I turned the envelope upside down. Another sheet slipped out. A birth certificate. June Rose Langley. Mother, Clara Addington. Father, Beauregard Langley. Date of birth, 3 months after I disappeared. My ears started ringing. The kind of ringing that drowns out everything else. The wind, the birds, the world. Just the pounding of blood and disbelief. Clara had been pregnant? When I left, and never told me? I felt dizzy. Betrayed all over again. In a brand new way I hadn't even imagined possible. A child. My child. Raised without me. A daughter whose first words, first steps, first everything, I had missed. Not by accident. By design. And now she tells me, with weeks to live? I wanted to scream. Cry. Punch the sky. Anything to make the crushing weight of it go away. But instead, I just stood there. Frozen. Because somewhere out there was a little girl. My daughter. And I didn't even know what her voice sounded like. I got back into the truck and started driving again. No destination. I just needed to feel the road. To feel something other than the tidal wave crashing through my ribcage. My mind raced. Did she look like me? Did she ask about her father? Did Clara ever plan to tell her? Or was I just a secret, tucked away like guilt in the back of a drawer? I stopped at a gas station and stared at my reflection in the restroom mirror. I didn't see a father. I saw a man broken in half, twice. Once by betrayal, now by revelation. What do you even do with this? How do you introduce yourself to a child who doesn't know you exist? Hi, I'm your dad. I vanished before you were born because your mother broke me. No child deserves that. And yet, no child deserves to grow up believing their father abandoned them either. I splashed water on my face, sat on the curb, and did something I hadn't done in years. I cried, like a fool, like a man who was handed the weight of 5 missing birthdays and didn't know how to carry them. And somewhere in the middle of those tears, a decision grew. I had to meet her. Not for Clara. For June. My daughter. My second chance. Even if I was the last man in the world who deserved one. It took me 3 days to find the courage. 3 days of driving in circles, of checking into dingy motels, of calling the number on Clara's envelope and hanging up before the first ring. I hadn't eaten much. I'd barely slept. My hands trembled when I brushed my teeth. The man I saw in the mirror looked like he'd just returned from war. Maybe he had. I called Clara on the 4th day. She answered on the 2nd ring. Her voice sounded even weaker now, like it had been dragged across gravel. "Beau, I want to meet her," I said, skipping the small talk. Silence. Then a soft, "I was hoping you'd say that." She gave me an address just outside of Ruidoso, a small house her sister, Winona, owned. Said they had a fenced-in yard and a swing set. Said June liked spaghetti and coloring. Said she'd told her there was someone special coming to visit. She didn't say your dad. I didn't correct her. I got there just after lunch. The air smelled like pine and something sweet baking in the oven. My boots crunched against the gravel path, every step echoing in my chest like a drumbeat. I was about to knock when I heard laughter, soft, high-pitched, giggly, the kind that makes your heart stutter. And then I saw her, through the screen door, out in the yard, a tiny figure in a red dress, her curls bouncing wildly as she ran circles around a dog I didn't recognize. She was laughing so hard she kept tripping, but every time she hit the grass, she popped back up and kept going like the world couldn't touch her. And then she stopped, turned toward me. And those green eyes, my eyes, locked with mine. It felt like being struck by lightning. She tilted her head, curious but unafraid, walked up to the door and pressed her face against the mesh. "Are you the special visitor?" she asked. I couldn't speak. I nodded, barely. "I made you a picture," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Want to see?" She disappeared for a second, then came back with a crayon drawing in both hands. It was messy and colorful and heartbreakingly simple. 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small, all holding hands beneath a big yellow sun. Above them, written in crooked letters, me, mommy, and special visitor. My throat closed. I forced a smile. "It's beautiful," I said, my voice barely holding steady. "Are you going to stay for spaghetti?" she asked, swinging the door open like she'd known me her whole life. Clara was sitting on the couch, a blanket draped over her knees, her skin waxy and pale. But she smiled, something genuine for the first time in years. "She's been excited all morning," she whispered. "Didn't sleep last night. Kept asking what your favorite color was." I told her blue. "Hope that's still right." I nodded. It was. June ran to the kitchen to check on the pasta. I sat down across from Clara, unsure what to say. "I didn't tell you because I was afraid," she said before I could open my mouth. "Afraid you'd hate me even more. Afraid you'd never come back if you knew." I didn't answer right away, because she wasn't wrong. I would have tried, I said finally. Maybe not right away, but I deserve to know. She nodded, eyes damp. I know, and I'm sorry. We sat in silence. And then June returned, holding a plate of spaghetti that was more sauce than pasta. Mommy can't eat much now, she said matter-of-factly. But I made this for you. I stirred it all by myself. Twice. She handed me the plate like it was sacred. And in that moment, sitting there with my daughter, across from the woman who broke me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not forgiveness, not peace, but purpose. For the first time since I vanished, I knew why I was still here. June didn't care about the past. She just wanted someone to eat her spaghetti. And maybe, just maybe, hold her hand when the sun went down. The days that followed moved slowly, gently, like a second chance learning how to breathe. I stayed. At first, I told myself it was just for a little while. Just long enough to make sure Clara was comfortable. Just long enough to give June a memory or two. Something to hold on to. If she ever asked about the man who drifted in and out of her life like a storm cloud. But that little while stretched. Days turned to weeks. And in those quiet weeks, something inside me began to mend. June was like sunlight in the form of a child. Wild, untamed, impossibly bright. She had my sarcasm and Clara's stubbornness. A dangerous mix, but one I couldn't help but love. Every question out of her mouth was a story waiting to be told. Every drawing, a piece of her heart offered freely. We played board games on the living room floor. She showed me how to make pancakes shaped like cats, which, for the record, looked nothing like cats. I didn't care. I ate them anyway. She made me bracelets out of yarn. I wore them like medals. Clara, for all her past sins, never once interfered. She watched from the couch, a soft smile on her lips, pain etched deep in her bones, but gratitude shining in her eyes. One evening, after June had fallen asleep beside me watching Finding Nemo, Clara called me into the kitchen. She needs you, Bo, she said simply. And I think you need her too. I didn't argue, because she was right. Clara passed 2 weeks later. It was a quiet morning. June was still asleep. I found her in her bed, her hands folded, her face peaceful. There was a note on the nightstand. Just one sentence. Thank you for showing up. I buried her under a blooming apple tree in the meadow behind Winona's house. June helped me pick the spot. Said Mommy liked trees that look like they're hugging the sky. We didn't have a big funeral. Just us, Winona, and a few neighbors who remembered Clara from better days. There were tears, yes, but there was also laughter. Stories. Healing. Afterward, June asked me if she was going to come live with me. I crouched down, held her face in my hands, and said, only if you want me to. She blinked. Daddy, I made a room for you. In my dreams. A long time ago. It has blue walls and a bookshelf full of stories we haven't read yet. I choked back a sob and nodded. Then let's paint it blue. It's been a year since Clara passed. I sold the bait shop. Moved to a quiet town in Colorado where no one knows the name Beauregard Langley except a little girl with crayon drawings pinned to every wall. June's room does have blue walls now, and a bookshelf we're slowly filling. Every night, before bed, she picks a story. Then she picks a memory. Tell me about you and Mommy, she says sometimes. Or, what was I like when I was a baby? I answer as best I can. With honesty. With love. Even when it hurts. She knows the truth, mostly. She knows people make mistakes. Big ones. But she also knows that some stories don't end where they break. They just take a different path. Sometimes I catch myself smiling for no reason. Sometimes I wake up and forget the pain ever existed. But then I remember, and it doesn't crush me anymore. It just reminds me of how far we've come, and how much we still have left. Because in the end, I didn't just find my daughter. I found me, the man I was meant to be. Not the broken one who vanished, but the father who stayed. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more emotional stories like this, and share it with someone who needs to believe that healing is still possible.